Day 1303 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,099,000 military personnel losses, with an above average loss quantity of 1,150 in the past day. Then as for hardware, no tanks, 1 APV, 17 artillery, a rocket launcher, and an air defense system. Next up, and to a brief weekly look at the territory of control stats, with Russia managing to scrape together just 0.01% more land for its occupation portfolio over the past 7 days, becoming quite the common theme, almost as if Moscow is deliberately aiming for this snail-paced rate of progress. In fact, this reoccurring pattern can sometimes be so striking that you could cheekily suggest that Russia penciled in a century-long roadmap, with full Ukrainian capitulation scheduled sometime in the year 2178, because take a look at the following. For the officially measured dates between September 8 and 14, the Russian army took 42 square kilometers of land, which accounts for approximately 6 square kilometers per day, mathematically equating to a staggering 228 years to reach the western borders of Ukraine, with that simple static projection outpacing the previous estimate I just mentioned, bringing it all the way up to the year 2253. But no matter the numbers, even still, the Kremlin continues to demonstrate its commitment to continue fighting this war, pressing on as though time itself were an expendable resource. Now to the map, with drone alerts reported for the occupied Donetsk region, as well as Rostov, Volgograd, and Stavropol overnight. And it's in Rostov city, for instance, where various districts across this region were plunged into darkness last night as power failures spread from the city center into surrounding neighborhoods. Streets that are normally lit up into the evening were reduced to faint glows, with it becoming the second consecutive evening that large parts of the city were forced into an early shutdown. This is because electricity and water supplies were cut by 10 p.m, and where mobile internet services were also restricted amid what officials described as drone-related risks. These events follow on from a mystery substation fire in Rostov yesterday, and beyond that, a critical railway communications facility of the same region up in flames following an inbound UAV strike. Then to the occupied peninsula, where Russian monitoring channels were in a panic, claiming that Ukrainian forces have launched Flamingo-type cruise missiles toward the Kerch Bridge. However, no bridge was hit, only the nerves of the local military telegram channels, their confidence collapsing under the weight of their own paranoia, with such Russian claims of Flamingo activity in the occupied peninsula that have begun to emerge for about a week or two now. And then on the map, to a different type of activity shaping up in Russia, as the efficacy of Ukraine's own personal brand of oil sanctions is now in plain sight, with fresh shortages of the refined car liquor sweeping through various regions. In Nizhny Novgorod, gasoline has virtually disappeared. Residents say that only a single station was selling 92 octane at 88 rubles a litre, and that prices were jumping by 30 rubles in just a matter of days. That's quite high, as before this supply crunch mess, prices were sitting around the 50 to 60 ruble mark per litre. But to put that in a more globally recognized context, 88 rubles per litre is equal to the US's $3.97 per gallon, which means, as of today, the average Russian citizen pays more than the average American citizen. And that's before even factoring in that Russian household income is only a fraction of the Russian average. Then, also for Mordor's fuel woes, I beg my pardon, Moscow's fuel woes, because in Stavropol Krai, half of all filling stations reportedly have no gasoline. The local Ministry of Industry insists supplies remain adequate, yet residents vehemently point to rising prices and lack of availability. On Russia's exchange, gasoline trading volume has slumped to 26,240 tons, becoming a 4.5% fall in just one day, and now running a full 25% below the August average. So the events are shaping up to show that Russia's fuel crisis isn't just a short-term blip, but structural in nature. Even Russia's own experts now concede the problem has no quick fix. For example, energy analyst Kirill Rodionov notes that gasoline prices are rising nearly twice as fast as inflation, with refinery damage hitting a market that never had much surplus capacity to begin with. Without sufficient protection against drone strikes and access to Western refining technology, both off the table, he warns that subsidies and export bans cannot stabilize supply. In other words, the Kremlin's levers are spent and the shortages are here to stay. Then also on the map in Kursk, Ukraine's Special Operations Forces struck the logistics hub of the 810th Marine Brigade. The strike tore through ammunition, weapons, equipment, and even the brigade's central supply base. Russia's 810th has got to be one of the most downtrodden brigades in all of Moscow's ranks. Then into the main map with a few updates to show, and starting off, the AFU was back at it again. At the crossroads between Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Luhansk, advancing marginally north of Novomikhailivka in the Svetova direction, as part of more counteroffensive activity we see ongoing of late, which could be seen again in the following, because moving down on the map to the roads often less traveled for the opposing armies, we see in Chasiv Yar the AFU's successful counterattacking to the northwest of the town, with a grey zone that extends all the way to the center of the town now. As for this region, Russia has claimed it as fully under their control for a few months now, which, technically speaking, you could use that terminology if referring to the central zip code of Chasiv Yar itself. But take a glance at the map. Does this wider township area, the full perimeter of Chasiv Yar, look secured on the map? Not by a long shot. Instead, this region reads as if Russian generals declared an early victory and then redeployed elsewhere. Then to head further down on the map, Ukrainian defense forces pushed back the enemy near Volodymyrivka on the Dobrapilla sector, just to its southeast. But at the same time, there were reports of the invader advances nearby to Shikova, which is an interesting development, although not likely happening in a vacuum, as Russian troops had lost ground practically at the very same time at the adjacent or opposite side of Novashikova, a change on the map spanning a 2.4 kilometer stretch of open plains where the Russian forces were driven back, forcing them to stretch thin in compensating maneuvers. Meanwhile, directly related to this region's fighting, President Zelenskyy traveled to the front line near Pokrovsk and Dobrapilla, meeting troops engaged in one of Ukraine's counter-offensive operations, praising the soldiers' heroic defenses, and underscoring that Ukraine's active operations continue to dismantle Russian plans. On site, he spoke of the Ukrainian forces having liberated 7 settlements and cleared 9 more, reclaiming over 160 square kilometers and securing another 170 from a Russian presence since the start of this counteroffensive in this very region, and also mentioning that nearly 100 occupiers have been taken prisoner, which may or may not include the following: this most recent haul of 19 soldiers captured by Ukraine's 425th Separate Assault Regiment. And as for the Ukrainian president's attendance at this location, you cannot help but contrast this with the Russian president's absence, nowhere to be seen in the war zone himself, for a war that he launched and first announced via a pre-recorded tape that was aired live. The closest he's ever been was at his tightly stage-managed visit to occupied Mariupol in March of 2023, where he toured rebuilt apartments, very much a Potemkin village, and was met with carefully selected residents in the middle of the night under heavy security and a location that was far removed from Ukraine's strike range capability at the time. Needless to say, well behind active front lines. The difference in leadership qualities is night and day here. A gulf in leadership styles laid bare. Then to take a look around the map with footage of a Ukrainian Air Force F-16AM Fighting Falcon shooting down a Russian attack drone with an AIM-9 Sidewinder. The Sidewinders are in decent supply internationally, but they are pricey for the duty that they perform here. But that's where Ukraine is revolutionizing air defenses in modern warfare. Because to look at the following, where we see a Ukrainian interceptor drone that takes out a Russian kamikaze Shahed UAV, and then following that, the interception of a Russian Lancet drone by 2 AFU drone operators. Now that's what you call a frag steal. And it's examples like these that are upending conventional warfare tactics, with Ukrainian Defense Minister Shmyhal recently updating on the matter to state that Ukraine will soon employ 1,000 interceptor drones per day, thereby accounting for a massive portion of Ukraine's new Sky Shield, with an ability to scale up even further than that. The cost-benefit analysis is a no-brainer, and these interceptor platforms are continually advancing in speed, range, precision, and production cost efficiency. More intelligent too, as we expect to see a lot of these come with their AI-assisted integrations, far cheaper than conventional anti-air missiles, but uniquely, the ability to wield the technology and acutely battlefield test it lies squarely with Ukraine's domain, cementing their dominance in the field, then on the map, and in this next set of examples, because sometimes the opportunity exists to save a drone, with a recent compilation video uploaded from the armed forces of Ukraine displaying their drone shooting nets in use to neutralize Russian FPV drones waiting in ambush on ground loitering mode. And there's a good chance that those enemy drones won't even know that they've been incapacitated until they attempt flight. Then to the news, and following the recent Pearl developments, which is the first NATO-funded US weapons package drawn from American stockpiles, which is now in motion. Deliveries are already reported to be underway, including Patriot air defense missiles and HIMARS rockets. The Pearl initiative, Purchasing United for Ukraine's Resilience and Liberty, was formally unveiled by NATO at the start of August, with $2 billion in aid already secured and commitments projected to reach $3.6 billion by the end of October. President Zelenskyy has confirmed that the shipment includes both defensive and offensive weapons, and already Ukraine's national broadcaster reports that the first load has already arrived, with NATO officials adding that more packages are on the way. And with a fresh resupply of HIMARS rockets coming through, never a day goes by where their utility could be put into question. Indispensable and unfailingly effective. Now to a very quick jolt of Russian hardware news. Here we go. A Russian scooter with a cargo of 3 TM62 anti-tank landmines takes the weight in 21st century Russian logistics, which is now all ready for a Ukrainian FPV to propel the rider straight into the after party. Then to a super quick funny to round out the video, with, in this case, one Russian mill blogger speaking with State Media TV, where he was not overly joyed to report that Ukrainian drone operators earn points for eliminating Russian occupiers and their equipment, and that points awarded giving them access to new weapons and other equipment-enhancing assets. But the real kicker here is how the mill blogger sums it all up with the question of, quote, "This is monstrous. Monstrous, a monstrous game. Russian soldiers are being eliminated. Where does so much hatred come from? For what?" End quote. Gee, I must have about 50,000 responses for this type of question, though it's truly astonishing how they still ask why the fire burns when they keep pouring gasoline all over it. Well, gasoline figuratively speaking, as the real stuff for them is already starting to hit the rationing stage. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment. Thanks for the subscribing and all of the support. I really do appreciate it, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!